All right, 3, 2, 1. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On tonight's show, I have a very special guest. He comes to us from California, and he is the son of an author of a book that was published in 1995. His name is John Spiering, Spiering. His father is Frank. He published a book titled Who Killed Polly? The True Story Behind the Abduction and Murder of Polly Klaas. It was a very famous case. Myself growing up in California, in Northern California, was all over the news. It happened in the Bay Area, particularly Petaluma in the Marin County. The book was published in July 1st, 1995. Unfortunately, Mr. Spiering, Frank Spiering, has passed away, but I'm delighted that his son has taken time out of his day to talk about the book. He sent me a bunch of information, which I read over. And like I said, I'm very familiar with the case, at least from the media perspective, but we're going to hear a different perspective tonight from John. So John Spiering, are you there?
Yes. Hey, William. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Well, thank you for agreeing to the interview. For people who haven't heard your name or your father's name, can you talk a little bit about his work and your kind of association with this book, Who Killed Polly?
Sure. My dad was a true crime writer. He started out actually as an insurance investigator in the 60s and was really good at, found that he was great at investigating cases, and he also was a playwright. He started out as a playwright, but he also wanted to be an author and write books. So he did both, and he got his break writing The Man Who Got Capone, which went on to become the basis for Brian De Palma's Untouchables movie with Sean Connery. And then he wrote another book about Jack the Ripper, which became a bestseller worldwide. It was banned in England, naming Jack the Ripper as a member of the royal family, Prince Edward, Duke of Clarence, Queen Victoria's grandson. And then that was with Doubleday. And then for Random House, he wrote a book about Lizzie Borden, and that was also a huge bestseller. About his theory was, after going up to Fall River, reviewing the case, and no one had really investigated the trial and all the documents, and he surmised that follow the money, of course, is always the big motive, and he discovered that the money led to not Lizzie Borden, but her sister Emma. So it's a very interesting story. You should try to pick that up if you can. It's on Amazon. And then, long story short, he and I went to, we had family in Monterey. My father was from Palo Alto, and my grandmother had moved to Carmel, and my uncle Jim is a lawyer in Monterey. He's an accident claim lawyer, but he's pretty popular there. And my Uncle Bob was a stockbroker. They also lived there. So we moved there really for me to go to college, and for my dad to catch up with family. And he was semi-retired at the time in poor health. So he and I, we used to go, my uncle lived on Del Monte Golf Course in Monterey. And at the end of the golf course, there's Hyatt Hotel has a sports bar there. So we'd go in the sports bar and have, before or after we saw my uncle, we'd have some drinks and watch a ball game. We love the Yankees. So one time, Polly Klaas case came on the TV while we were sitting there having a beer, and the waitress came over, and she said, it's the father. She was taken for the money. He was involved with drugs. And my father and I looked at each other like, you gotta be kidding me. So my dad said, well, how do you know this? And she says, well, I go out with the Sonoma County Sheriff. So my father and I, we looked at each other and thought, this is incredible. So afterwards, the case became a national, it was a national case because it was the first time a missing child had been looked for with the use of the internet. And Winona Ryder was from Petaluma. So she got involved immediately, put up $200,000 to find Polly. And they had a huge grassroots movement using the internet looking for this girl for a month.
And her just to interject, her abduction took place October 1st, 1993, right?
That's correct.
So right there, sorry.
So it took them a month to bring in Richard Allen Davis, who was they arrested for her kidnapping, and he led them to the body. And it took them over 6 weeks to identify the body because the FBI claimed the coroner was in Bosnia. They didn't use the local sheriff coroner. They used the FBI forensic specialist who, I guess he was the only one in the entire FBI, but there was a lot of strange things that happened in that case.
Very true. And Richard Allen Davis, can you talk about him and what his history was leading up to the abduction of Polly Klaas, who was 12 years old at the time?
Richard Allen Davis was a career criminal, and he just was paroled for kidnapping, and he's only been out a month, and then supposedly he was up in Ukiah, staying with his on an Indian reservation with his sister, and for some reason, apparently he thought it'd be a good idea to go down to Petaluma one night and find some girl, and that's the official story.
The official story is that it was totally random, that he just happened to be in Petaluma and happened to walk in this house. I mean, it's a very strange story. Can you talk about the details of the abduction for people who haven't heard of this case?
Well, the really bizarre thing is when Polly was in there with her two friends having a slumber party. It was 10:30 at night, I believe, and Richard Allen Davis came in through the window with a knife and said, "Who lives here?" And Polly said, "I do." And he said, "I'm just doing this for the money." And he proceeded to tie up the three girls. And Polly offered him $50 that was in her jewelry box on the bureau. And he ignored her and didn't take the money. So one of the girls, the interesting thing is when he said, "Who lives here?" one of the girls stood up for some reason, thinking he was talking to her, I believe, or I think he meant he was getting ready to take one of them, and he says, "Okay, now stand up," directing to Polly. And one of the other girls stood up thinking he was talking to her. And he said, "No, not you." And he proceeded to take Polly. Now, if you're just doing it for the money, why wouldn't you take the money that she offered? And if it was something else, like he was a child molester, why would he care which girl lived there? And why wouldn't he have taken, I don't know, all three of them? So there's a lot of weird things that happen.
Yeah, very strange that he was specific about that, and he seemed to focus on Polly instead of the other two. And then what happened next? I mean, it's known that he left with Polly Klaas, but there was also some suspicious things that happened that same night, correct?
Well, before he left, Polly said, "Please don't wake up my mother. She's sleeping in the next room." And Davis became furious. He says, "You're supposed to be alone. There's not supposed to be anybody here." And she says, "No, she's sleeping in the next room." And as it turns out, the mom was supposed to be off that night, working rather, at a call center, which her job, she worked nights. And they were putting in a new phone system, so she happened to be home that night. The other thing is there's witnesses that saw another man at the back door, and they testified in court. And none of this was picked up by the media, and the police didn't really pursue that for some reason, which is very strange. And so he left. As he was leaving with Polly, he took her to a Let me backtrack a little bit here.
Okay.
So he took Polly They left. An hour later, Davis is trespassing on Dana Jaffe's property. It's a wooded area, a very secluded wooded area, about 5 miles from Polly's house. And two sheriff deputies show up. They're called to the property because she calls the police. They show up, and Davis is standing there outside of his car drinking a beer, and Polly's nowhere in sight. They ask him what he's doing there. He says he's sightseeing at 11:30 at night, and he has an open container. Apparently, they ran his driver's license, and they said nothing came up, even though he was just paroled for kidnapping. Meanwhile, an APB was supposedly had gone out for this girl who had just been kidnapped. So they release Davis, and they don't even consider him a suspect for over a month, until they finally arrested him at the Indian reservation at his sister's house in Ukiah.
Right. It took him a while to kind of key into that. There was some type of mix-up between the radios that they were using, so the APB didn't go out to the police, if I remember correctly. But he was half Indian, right? So he was on reservations. Was it the Coyote Valley Indian Reservation?
That's correct.
Yeah. So,
but the other thing is, after 5 hours later, after Polly was abducted, the FBI had 15 agents show up and take over the Sonoma Sheriff Department. And normally you have to wait 24 hours to call in the FBI for a missing children case. But of course, it was an abduction. But it was unusual that you would send that many agents that quickly. I don't know what the protocol is for that.
And then there was the parents. She was the product of two parents who went through a divorce, right? And didn't they really bicker and hate each other? Just if I remember correctly.
That's correct. And as a matter of fact, Mark Klaas was kicked off of the Polly Klaas Foundation.
Right. Sorry.
Nobody knows exactly why. Obviously, you don't want to kick a father when he's down during that situation, but apparently he had misappropriated funds. And my theory was that maybe he was trying to raise ransom money to pay for Polly to be returned. And it's just a theory, but why else would he have done that?
Right. And so then, there was just so much activity after she was kidnapped. It was daily. Being in that area, I was actually there right around that time in '93, and it was on the news every day, follow-ups, searching. People I think they brought in psychics, if I remember correctly.
Right.
So it was just a massive manhunt. There were manhunts, and then they finally got this guy, and he just turned out to be a real monster, Davis, but just a career thief, criminal. And so what happened after they arrested Davis? What did he say that made him culpable?
His story was, well, first of all, there was a confession that was suspect. Everyone said or thought that the confession had been coerced, and he claims in the confession, he states that he was high and just ended up there and randomly went into some house, grabbed a girl. No reason was given for why he targeted her. It was just a strange confession. And obviously he wasn't that high. The police would have taken him in immediately when the sheriffs found him on the road an hour later. And I'm just doing this for the money. And his sister said, well, I have two kids, and he never, ever did anything to them. He sure could have. And his sister's husband said Dave was working with someone else, he told us. And
didn't they, and they eventually brought them in for trial, but he never said what money he was getting, correct? That was never exposed or revealed.
No, and my father always thought that perhaps it got so hot so fast that whoever he was supposed to make the drop with didn't show up, or he couldn't get the money, and as a result may have just killed her there. but or she may have been shuttled off by whoever he was working with there at the site at her house, because there was another car also seen outside the house. It was I believe it was I think Davis was driving a Pinto, and the other car was a Ford, but Davis's Pinto wasn't outside, so that was strange. And the father was never he didn't cooperate with us in the beginning. The family was they would at least talk to my father, and soon after he shut down, my father, the book came out. Mark wouldn't talk to us anymore, and he never talked to us actually. But he never, even though my father had these theories and semi-accusations from the lady that told us initially that he was involved with drugs, and she was taken because he owed them money. Interesting thing, I saw an article in Vanity Fair about, 10, 15 years ago, but with interview with Mark Klaas, and they noted that he was missing his pinky finger, which is, we all know what that means.
Right. Yakuza.
So he kind of glossed over it and didn't answer how that happened. But that would be an interesting question to ask. I'm sure he's got a good answer.
I bet he does. But I mean, it's interesting because you guys published the book in 95. This is even before Davis got tried and convicted and got death penalty sent to San Quentin. So there was so much there. And Mr. Klaas, I don't remember the mother being as media hungry or savvy as he was, because he was always, I mean, if he could find a microphone, he would just start talking, if I remember correctly. Did you have the same impression?
Oh, absolutely. The interesting thing is he was given a polygraph test by the police and said, you know what happened. You've known from the beginning what's going on. And he was a suspect in the beginning.
Interesting.
And my father raised all these questions, and he never ever once threatened us with any legal action or came after us whatsoever. The only thing he did do was undermine any talk shows my dad had. So we were supposed to be on Oprah. He was supposed to be on Oprah and Geraldo, and behind the scenes, Mark said, I won't do the show if Frank's on, and just discredited him. But he never came after my father legally in any way, which is odd.
That is odd. I mean, and your dad kind of thought, his conclusion was that there was something sketchy about him. Is that correct? Was that his opinion?
Absolutely. And we found, there's a writer from, I think it was, I'm not sure what the name of the paper was, the something Sentinel, Napa Sentinel, I think Harry Martin was up there. And he said that he had contacts that told him Mark was involved at, I guess that he worked at a Hertz rent-a-car at the airport, and he was involved with drugs. I don't know. Gotcha. This was the rumor, on a large scale. So,
gotcha. So Klaas was a large-scale, rumored to be a large-scale drug user. I mean, he's still around, right?
Well, involved in trafficking.
Gotcha. Was there any corroboration of that? Other than rumors or anything?
We couldn't get any more information on that. I mean, if Harry Martin's still alive, he would have more info on that. We had enough stuff to talk about, and certainly weren't going to accuse,
Sure,
Mark of doing that.
But there was, it's interesting. You sent me some of the information. Klaas was right there behind Bill Clinton signing the notorious 1994 crime bill, partially authored, at least in the Senate, by current presidential candidate Biden. So these guys he was very much in the public eye all the time.
Well, that's interesting, because my father always thought, what are they hiding? Why would they go to this great length to protect this man, even if he was involved somehow? It was, indirectly with his daughter's abduction. And at the end of the day, they just, every step of the way, they kept covering this up and dragging it out. And it was just odd. So when he finally signed the crime bill, my father had a eureka moment. He says, there it is. he's a hero, and they didn't want to take him down. And there was a lot on the line on that crime bill, if you remember.
Yes.
And the other really interesting thing is, if you really want to go there, is Bill Clinton signed that crime bill, and he was also involved with Jeffrey Epstein. So, I don't know.
Right. Oh, and there's a lot of drug rumors about him in Arkansas as well. I mean, some would say more than rumors, but
Epstein with the child trafficking,
absolutely,
QAnon stuff. So who knows?
Yeah, no, I mean Epstein notorious. I mean, I think that it's pretty much verified that he was involved in all kinds of trafficking, even going back to the '90s. So, it is fascinating. It is fascinating that Klaas was right there, and that is still a relevant issue, that crime bill, because it was very law and order, very strict. And I think that the 3 strikes rule in California came out of the Klaas case.
Absolutely.
So yeah.
That's right. Exactly. And that's why it was so important to not, taint this case. They needed the case to be clean. They needed it to work for that reason. And, it's possible.
Right. And Davis really was kind of the poster boy for the 3 strikes rule. If you look through his rap sheet, it's just incredible. The guy was constantly breaking the law, burglary, all kinds of stuff, drinking and driving, auto theft, just in and out of jail constantly. Just couldn't keep himself out of trouble ever.
Exactly. And he was a career criminal. He denied it to this. I mean, he always denied sexually assaulting her. So what was the motive then? And who was going to pay him if he was just doing it for the money? Not only that, but they asked him if he'd been working with someone else, and he said no. Of course, he's not going to snitch on someone. I mean, there's a code with the criminals.
Right, especially a lifelong criminal who's in and out of jail too. So that ethos definitely is there. And he notoriously, I remember seeing the mail or the kind of print media really freaking out when he accused the dad of being a pedophile and said that the daughter had said something really inflammatory, that the father was a pedophile. He said it to his face and then flipped him the finger, and that in court, and that was all over the news too.
Whose father?
It was Davis was in court with Mr. Klaas, the father of Polly.
Right.
And he said something like, the last thing she said to me was, "Don't do me like my daddy does me," or something like that.
I don't know. That sounds like a dig.
Oh, it was a huge dig, but I think that he did say that, and there's pictures of Davis, with his finger flipping off, I think either the judge or the dad. I mean, I remember seeing those.
I do remember that now, and obviously, Klaas was getting under his skin, or maybe there was more to it. Maybe they knew each other on some level. Who knows?
Yeah, I don't know. It just was it's so random that's what really freaked people out, was the randomness of the crime. But it may not have been random. That's what's really scary.
That's right.
So Davis, I think he's still in San Quentin. And what's Mr. Klaas? I can't remember his first name. What was his name?
Mark.
Mark Klaas.
Just pointed. I haven't seen or heard from him in many years. I guess he still has a foundation. He started his own foundation at some point.
And he kind of did become kind of the go-to guy for a lot of these talk shows, as parents' rights, and also children's abductions and stuff. Like, I just remember him over time being referenced. Like, do you have an opinion on this case?
Absolutely. He did great work afterwards, of course. His father, Joe Klaas, Polly's grandfather, he always picked up the phone for my father, even after the case and the book was released. He lived in Monterey, so my father would go see him, and they'd sit down and have coffee. And Joe Klaas said to my dad, he said, "The truth will come out someday." And
Fascinating.
That's an interesting quote.
That's fascinating. Yeah, it's such an important. I mean, the kind of politicization of the case was remarkable. How it changed legislation nationwide. It was really something else.
Yes, exactly. Um, and Winona Ryder getting involved, of course.
Right. So, um, and what, I mean, do you, what else about the case should the public know? Is there any other pertinent facts or anything?
Well, it's never been solved. The other man has never been identified. Why? The motive is the big thing. I'm just doing this for the money. It was not a sexual. He was not a sexual predator. The woman he kidnapped was more of a carjacking, and it was an adult woman that he kidnapped. The motive is the big thing, and no one's ever they just go, it was the first time the internet was used, but they didn't have social media, of course, back then, and they swept a lot of these things under the rug. There's so many questions. For instance, why wasn't Davis arrested that night?
Right.
Why wasn't he given a field sobriety test? I certainly would have if they had pulled me over.
Right. No, it was super suspicious because he was just loitering on somebody's property.
Drinking a can of beer,
Yeah,
and then
open
let
beer.
him get back in his car and go on his way. And then he pulled over at the bottom of the hill, and the cops just drove by and didn't even go back to say, why did you we just told you to leave. You just pulled over again, just disrespecting what we told you to do.
What's your opinion of the case? Do you think that Polly Klaas was murdered at that time, or that she was kept alive for some period of time?
I had, it's gone both ways. I thought when we were researching the case, I thought, well, the police showed up and he killed her immediately. That's why she didn't cry out in the woods. But they didn't find her body there. Maybe he just dumped it off later. But then I thought, well, when the other man, the witnesses mentioned the other man at the scene in the back of the house, a clean-shaven man. Two witnesses saw a tall, clean-shaven man behind the house. Then I thought, well, maybe he took Polly with him, and Davis, maybe they met on that road there to exchange money and Polly. And maybe he took off with Polly. And why did it take so long for them to identify the body? They knew the FBI was involved, and Davis was never a suspect. He got pulled over that night in the same town. He was a kidnapper, and they knew where he didn't go anywhere. He was living with his sister. Why wouldn't they have, at least interviewed the guy? And he looked exactly like the sketch. It was originally released. So, I mean, maybe you can say the Sonoma sheriffs were Keystone cops every step of the way, but then the FBI not following this up, I mean, that's pretty incredible. And then for them to take 6 weeks after the body was found, 6 weeks to release, to finally get the autopsy done, because they said their forensic expert was in Bosnia. It just makes you think. And then Barry Collins, who is the defense attorney, told my father and I outside the courthouse that he thought the body was planted.
And, so it was found in Cloverdale, which is kind of up, I think, the 101 north of Petaluma.
That's correct.
When you say planted, so it was moved, like somebody had it somewhere and put it somewhere else?
Well, the body was never clear. The family was never allowed to identify the body. And it's just an odd thing that if it was my daughter, I want to go see, I don't care how long it's been, I'd have to see the body. And Mark declined, almost as if he knew either that was not her or that it certainly was her. So that was definitely a strange thing.
And she was buried like right off the 101, right? Like right off the freeway.
20 feet off the road, right there under a piece of some brush. And it was just so strange because it took so long for them to catch Dave, to bring Davis in. And then, of course, he took them right to the body, apparently. But why drag it out? And then, she didn't have any, the dental records are pretty generic. She was not identified by dental records, just by her clothing. And anyway, it's just a bizarre case.
It really is strange. It really is. And then he, think he almost overdosed from opiates, and yeah, I mean,
Well, actually, I was mistaken. It didn't take them 1 month to find Davis. It took them 2 months.
2 months, right?
I just read here.
Yeah, I forgot. I mean, I don't know why they finally keyed into him. I think it was something. I don't know.
Well, it was an anonymous tip.
Anonymous tip. Okay.
That's what it was, which is even more bizarre.
Interesting. I didn't know that. So he became the prime suspect from an anonymous tip, got interviewed, confessed. That was it. And he was kind of looked like a boogeyman. Like, I think he was fully tatted, sleeved.
Sure.
Like a hardcore criminal.
Yeah, he looked very scary.
Yeah. Kind of a nasty temperament.
Yeah.
At least public temperament. What do you think are the chief takeaways of this criminal case? Like I mean, I guess the public should know that there's a lot more to the story.
Yeah, I think unfortunately, I think this was a political case, and I think that they didn't know what to do, and I think they dragged it out and hit everything as long as they could. And knowing that Davis was going to be the poster child for the 3 strikes law, and they couldn't taint the case, I just think it worked out. They needed somebody. They needed a high-profile case. This was perfect. Maybe they decided that before they knew how dirty Mark was, or I shouldn't say that, but the details.
Allegedly.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many unanswered questions.
Right. I mean, it is very odd, and there were other oddities too. I think they took the case down to Santa Clara County. I think that was also not the jurisdiction of where the case happened, but I think he was tried in San Jose, if I remember.
Right.
Like, it was just oddity after oddity.
And also they identified the evidence linking Davis to Polly was a palm print. It was a partial palm print. And after that, a year or two after that case, the FBI crime lab was shaken up because they had been creating evidence. I don't want to have the FBI after me because they already have. They did come after my father and I when this book came out.
In what way?
Twice. When the book first came out, we went down to Los Angeles for my dad had an interview with KTLA. And we signed into a hotel. We had a reservation for a week or so, and showed up at the hotel in Pico and Ocean in Santa Monica. And we went out. When we showed up to check into our room, they said, "Oh, sorry, your room's not ready yet." And we said, "What do you mean it's not ready yet?" So they said, "Well, we have an FBI convention right now." A true story, swear to God. So when we finally checked, we had to wait 20 minutes, a half hour to go up to our room to drop off our bags. So when we went up to the room with the bellhop, there was a guy in our room just putting back one of the vents behind the bed in the wall. So we thought, oh my God, what the hell's going on here? So we went across the street to the sports bar to watch the Yankees and the Mariners had a big playoff game. And all of a sudden, my dad and I were at the bar, and there was no one there. And all of a sudden, all these guys in suits came up and sat around us. And it was really strange. So we knew that we were under surveillance. Why, I don't know. Maybe they thought we had some more information, or I wasn't sure. So then a couple weeks later, we went up to San Francisco, and we were sitting at a bar by the Fairmont Hotel watching a ball game. 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, and this guy sits between my father and I and starts talking to us. And he asked me, he knew a lot. He said, you guys are from Monterey? And he just knew a lot. He knew too much. He just, was just asking these really odd questions. And then he brought up the Polly case. And so my father was tired, and he went up to his hotel room, and I stayed with this guy for a little while, and he offered to come up to my room. He said, do you party? And I said, yeah, I guess so. And he says, well, and he was in a suit and he had a briefcase. And he says, what do you like?
And he's like, you like pot? I said, well, I don't really do that anymore. He says, you want some Coke? And I said, no, thanks. And he had all this stuff in his briefcase, apparently. And it was just the oddest thing. And I was, really shaken by that. And I knew. And then he kept pressing me with the questions about the case. So finally I thought, I'm just going to tell him. I said, we made it all up. I just I was scared. I didn't know what was happening. So after I said that, I tried to convince him that we had just made the whole thing up. And he gave up at that point. But, it was very...
So it seems like they had an interest in the case after your book was published in 95. And so, I wouldn't be surprised. There's a lot riding on that case. It was a very national case. There was tons of legislation and tons of things that really, if you go back and read the 1994 Crime Act, it had vast implications on many, many, many criminal cases. It was like the beginning of the sex crimes registry, if I remember correctly, was that?
That's correct.
Yeah, all kinds of stuff. So a lot of people probably wanted to make sure that that legislation stayed in place, which it has.
Not only that, but after the trial, my father tried to get some more, stuff for the book. And the FBI said that the case was still open. They were still investigating it. And what was there to investigate?
Wow, that's interesting.
He'd already been sentenced, so.
Wow, yeah. Let's see. There was the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act, made 100,000 new police, $15 billion in funding. Like, these are pretty massive. After the 101 California street shooting, I remember that as well.
We see there's a lot on the line, and they didn't want to jeopardize it. Who knows what kind of conspiracy was really behind her abduction, but
right.
What would you do at that point if you had all that on the line?
I don't know.
I'm not saying it was the right thing to do. I'm just saying that, it's not beyond reason that they might have gone ahead with that.
All right, Violence Against Women Act, Jacob Wetterling Crimes Against Children, Sexually Violent Offender Registration Act, all kinds of stuff. So there was a big bill. There was all kinds of stuff. Boot camps for delinquent minors, 3 strikes provision for repeat offenders. You can just read through all the implications are vast. I think that Trump, some of his reforms directly addressed all the stuff that happened in this act.
That's true. You asked me what I thought about what happened to her, but my father, he believed that she was abducted and sold into white slavery, and he became friends after his book came out. John Cummins from the National Institute of Missing Children reached out to my dad, and they became friends, and he told us all kinds of stories. There was 100,000 children were being abducted a year and sold into white slavery, and he had military friends and witnesses that saw, American girls in Saudi Arabia being held as sex slaves, and, there was a lot of money involved. And now I find someone sent me a link 2 days ago that now the number is not 100,000. Now the number is 750,000 children are disappearing every year now.
Wow, that's a huge number. Those things, they do happen. If you look into yachting and all this stuff, there's a huge underground trade. Epstein's a perfect example. But what comes to mind is the Yosemite murders that involved these 3 girls. I think it was right around the time of Klaas, actually. And I talked to Steve Sanzeri, and he said one of the girls was probably trafficked and was sexually trafficked and kept alive for a month. It's terrifying. But taken to like Modesto or something. And then, once they were done with her, they killed her. Terrible. And it's happened to like Holly Bobo is in one case that comes to mind. So these are really crazy events with these guys doing drugs and just nightmare stuff.
There's a lot of money involved. And Davis was... the family, I know that there was a meth connection up there. They raided the reservation, and Davis's sister, I think, and his brother-in-law were arrested in a meth raid. I guess I don't know if they were trafficking it, but for the FBI to go in there and raid the, whatever was going on, it was a large scale.
Well, I think I read that when Davis was arrested, he had like ounces of meth. So he had meth on his person, if I remember.
Definitely a drug connection there.
Yeah. So yeah, these kind of criminal groups, meth, there's a lot of weird sex trafficking. I mean, same thing that happened in the Yosemite murders. I think that there were other people who were co-conspirators who were unindicted. Then I think it was Steve. I can't remember his last name, but right around the time of Polly Klaas. So, and some of those back then, Marin was much more rural than it is today. Not saying that it's rural, but
Sure.
it's still, when I grew up in California back in the 70s and 80s, there were still heavy-duty biker bars in the peninsula.
Right.
Rough crews. I mean, even in Monterey, certain places, there were bars you just did not go into, man.
True. This is very interesting.
So it's changed a lot in 30 years. I mean,
it sure has. Yeah, 26 years ago.
Yeah. So before we wrap up, John, is there anything else that you would like to add or anything about, we know your dad's books are all on Amazon. Is there anything we missed? Anything you want to?
No, I just want to thank you for finding this story and reaching out to me. I've never done this before, and I'm a little nervous. I thank you for being so patient with me. I'm sure I can't hold a candle to my father. He was a tremendous investigator and speaker.
Yeah. So his book on Jack the Ripper was Prince Jack: The True Story of Jack the Ripper by Frank Spiering.
That's right.
You can get a paperback version on Amazon right now for $855. No joke.
Oh my.
So that was written in 1978. Lizzie was right before Who Killed Polly. That was 1984 with a rewrite in 1991. Polly Klaas, the book we discussed today, is Who Killed Polly? The True Story Behind the Abduction and Murder of Polly Klaas by Frank Spiering. But this has been John Spiering. So John Spiering, thank you so much.
Thank you, William.
All right, have a great day.
Appreciate it.